Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special edition of Inside D2Football, where we reveal the Elite 100 team. Appreciate you joining us for this unique night and unique broadcast. With my friends Chuck Bittner, Matt Witwicky, Chris Ferguson, and Tony Nicolette, I am Brandon Meisner, and we are excited to release our Elite 100 team. Tonight, we will reveal the 100 members of the team. We feel that these are the best 100 members of 100 players in Division II. And if we are creating our team roster, this is what it would look like. We're going to shine some light on some guys you might not have heard of that we might not have talked about this year on Inside D2Football. And we'll also name the offensive, defensive, and coach of the year. And we'll also have an overtime and discuss whatever is on your guys' mind. But again, appreciate you joining us on a unique night. Obviously, it didn't make much sense to do this Christmas Eve, and it didn't make much sense to do it New Year's Eve. So here we are. And like I said, we are excited to go ahead and talk about the 2023 Elite 100 team. With that, let's get this thing started. Gentlemen, let's go ahead and start with our squad. Now, the way I want to explain as I'm bringing this up, the squad, it would be the 50 players who were not named to first and second team. And I like calling them the squad members more than I would like honorable mention, because I think that in some ways that's disrespectful to call them honorable mention. These players are the top 100 players in Division II, and any kind of disparaging mark on their name is not acceptable in my opinion. So these are our squad members, guys that we would have on our roster if we were creating a team. We'll start out at the quarterback position, where we have Sammy Edwards of Valdosta State, Braden Gleason of Emporia State, Braden Long of Slippery Rock, Gage Porter, Southern Nazarene, and Patrick Shegog from Delta State.
Yeah, and Brandon, one of the guys we're going to highlight here in this group is Gage Porter, and he actually might be one of my favorite people on our list for the simple fact that he ran the helm of an offense that was only on a 500 football team, and yet his name came up on our Sunday night shows on the regular. I mean, we talked about this guy a lot. And so even though his team was only 500 on the season, he's still a guy that from that quarterback position led the country in rushing, had a big game in the bowl game, lost to Emporia State, and wound up at 2 yards short of 2,000 yards on the season on the ground. So the impact that he had just on his own team, but certainly in visibility to the GAC and just teams that are trying to make their way up the ladder within D2, I think was really impressive. And obviously anybody that's going to put up that kinds of numbers, indisputable what kind of talent he brings and how important he was to his team.
Yeah, and I would just want to highlight Shegog because, he kind of led Delta to, co-championship and to go south, passed for 32 touchdowns. Actually, kind of interesting that he out of the 12 games that he played in, only had 11 games where he didn't throw an interception. He only threw 2 interceptions on the year, and that was only one game. Also, he rushed for almost 700 yards and an additional 12 touchdowns. So, quite a season for him.
It was. All right, let's go ahead and move to running backs, where our members of the squad are Sheen Butler Lawson, Minnesota State, Jada Byers of Virginia Union, Chris Collier from Lock Haven, Blake Dela Cruz of Harding, Dwayne McGee of Lenore Rhine, Trey Stewart of Limestone, and Siobhan Wright from Charleston.
Yeah, Brandon, a heck of a list here. Makes you kind of eager to see who ended up being on our first and second team when we eventually get there. But, a guy I wanted to point out was a guy that kind of got to the back burner a little bit this year, Jada Byers, who had a tremendous season a year ago. When I take a look at his year, he missed 2 weeks, in late September. And as a result of it, kind of fell out of the rushing race a little bit. But over the last 7 weeks of the season, he averaged about 140 a game and ended up having big games against Fayetteville State and other teams to get them into the playoffs. And I thought I thought we'd be remiss if we didn't have him on this squad. He still finished with almost 1,200 yards and 16 tuds. A heck of a season by everyone else's standards. He didn't quite have the year he did, last year, but still a truly outstanding player in Division II.
Yeah, and a player on this list that we didn't really see or talk a whole lot about until we got deep into the season, into the playoffs, was Siobhan Wright from Charleston. But he had a heck of a year for the Eagles. He ended up being the MEC Offensive Player of the Year, led Charleston into the playoffs, and won their first conference championship since the formation of that league. And really deserves to be talked about as one of the top running backs in D2. He finished fourth in the nation in total rushing yards, was one of just 5 players to top 1,500 rush yards for the season, and one of just 5 with more than 20 rushing touchdowns. So a really impressive season for him, and probably someone who deserved to be talked about a little bit more. And we want to celebrate the season that he had.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on to wide receivers and tight ends. We've got Jelani Baker from Limestone, Ben Nolan from South Dakota Mines, excuse me, Kyle Sheets from Slippery Rock, Tyler Common from Emporia State, Kevin Folsch from New Haven, and Sam Pitts from Minnesota Duluth.
Yeah, a year ago, South Dakota Mines had 2 wide receivers who caught over 1,100 yards, and they both left and entered Ben Nolan, who was a transfer from Northern State. And all he did was continue that success. Had over almost 1,200 yards receiving, 15 touchdowns, a very reliable 6 games of 100 yards receiving or more, and he had 5 games with multiple touchdowns. That's how impactful he was stepping in at South Dakota Mines.
Yeah, Kyle Sheets is a player on this team that we expected a lot of coming into the season, and once again, he really delivered in that really stacked Slippery Rock offense. But even with teams planning to minimize his impact, he finished the year with 76 catches, over 1,100 yards, finished 3rd in the nation in receiving touchdowns with 17. And really, guys, because of the attention that he commands, really elevated a lot of other players on that Slippery Rock offense as well. I mean, his teammate Cohen Russell actually had very even numbers with Kyle Sheets because of the attention that he's able to draw and what he's able to do within that offense. So I think Kyle actually does project to the next level. He's getting a lot of pro attention. He has since the end of last year. He has the size and the athleticism. So I think he's going to have a chance to be on an NFL roster this time next year.
All right, let's look at the guys up front. We've got Jacob Bruce from West Florida, Shane Bumgardner from Tiffin, Trayvon Kalen from Minnesota Duluth, Robert Dunham from Henderson State, Devin Hannon from Valdosta State, Tom McDonald from Assumption, and Hunter Willis of Harding.
Yeah, Brandon, I wanted to kind of highlight a guy who actually transferred in to Valdosta, and that's Devin Hannon. He was an all-league player at Kutztown a year ago in the PSAC, and then came on down to Valdosta and was an all-league player for the Gulf South. Really helped this club as they kind of transformed, things offensively to the point of being one of the top offenses in all the country. And I thought he was a name that deserved being recognized. And if we really take a look, this list here, along with who we'll see later, a lot of these guys are getting looks at the next level for a lot of good reasons. And we'll kind of see the rest of that list as we continue.
Absolutely. Let's move to the defensive side of the ball, guys. And let's start with the defensive line. We've got Jamae Blank from UNC Pembroke, Jaden Broughton from Benedict, Dio Dessois from Seton Hill, Nick Evans from Charleston, Marcus Hansen from Bemidji State, Gary Lewis from Henderson State. We have Cam Rice from West Liberty, Dakari Streeter from Missouri Western, and Justin Thomas from Indianapolis.
Yeah, it's a good group of players, guys. And I'll tell you what, if you put on some game tape of West Liberty, you're going to notice Cam Rice right away. He really stands out. He's physically impressive at 6'3", 260. Very versatile player. Primarily plays from that edge rush position, which you would kind of guess based on those measurements. But they move him around a lot too. He sometimes plays in the interior. They sometimes move him to a middle linebacker position. And no matter where he is on the field, he is just a problem for an offense to deal with. He actually led the nation in tackles for loss and solo tackles for loss, despite the fact West Liberty only played 10 games. I also had 9 sacks, which put him in the national top 10. Forced 4 fumbles, blocked 2 kicks, intercepted 2 passes, and scored 2 touchdowns. So just a ridiculous season for Cam Rice. Also, guys, only a redshirt sophomore, so really to see what he can do in the next couple of years.
Sorry, guys, didn't realize I was on mute. Everything you said about Rice is true, Chuck, and similarly, Dakari Streeter, to me, had one of the bell cow seasons of this year in terms of production, 12.5 sacks, good enough to be the defensive player of the year in the MIAA. And I think that's particularly impressive when you look at just the brand of physicality that's played in the MIAA. Anybody that's going to earn accolades from an offensive or a defensive front in that league is usually somebody who's going to be having a shot at the next level and has been extremely disruptive throughout the season. And Streeter fits that bill to a T. So a lot of good guys on this list, though. There were a lot of dudes in this group that were fun to watch all year.
All right, let's look at the linebackers on the squad. We've got Hayden Kelly from UT Permian Basin, Kendall Lightfoot from Western Colorado, Sal Lupoli from Bentley, John Ross May from Lenore-Rhine, Devin Roush from East Central, and Clay Scheffner from Winona State.
Brandon, I can tell you our RMAC columnist, AC, would be talking to my ear right now saying, Kendall Lightfoot needs to be on this team. He's the best player on the Western Colorado team, a defense that was one of the best in SR4. 86 tackles, 13 tackles for loss, had 3 picks. Really did a whole lot for that defense. Really good football player. Definitely deserved to be on this list.
And there's one player on here that we've actually recognized as one of our players of the week, but we really haven't talked about very much, and that's Sal Lupoli. 123 tackles on the season, which is just incredible. But not only that, 12.5 tackles for loss. When we recognized him during the regular season, he had a 20 tackle game against St. Anselm. So just a tackling machine, what he's been able to do to solidify that Bentley defense is noteworthy.
All right, and let's go and look at the final positions on our squad. Let's go to the defensive backs, where we have Daniel Bone III from CSU Pueblo, Amos Coleman III from Texas A&M Kingsville, Aaron Davis from Wheeling, Jai Jenkins from New Haven, Michael King from Tuskegee, Warrior Noel from Central Missouri, Andrew Pitts from Angelo State, Josh Stokes from Slippery Rock, and Major Williams, Carson Newman.
Yeah, Brandon, Daniel Bone is kind of the first name that we see on that list. And when you look at his statistics, they don't necessarily jump out at you from what you think of as a defensive back. Only 3 interceptions, did get a couple of fumble recoveries. So being in on some turnovers was helpful. But he was so critical to Pueblo after they got off to that 1-3 start after playing a really tough early schedule. I mean, that's a team that won 7 straight, and the defense got increasingly stingy over the rest of the season, and Bone led that team in tackles. 84 tackles from a defensive back position. Not necessarily who you want making all your tackles, having plays get that deep, but having guys who can make tackles from that position is so critical. As we've watched so many teams that can't tackle in space. Bone's not that guy. You get in space one-on-one with him, he's going to get you on the ground. And guys like that are so critical to teams, and to see guys like that on this list is part of why we do this, right?
And you know what, Tony, I've got a similar player that I wanted to speak about, and that's Major Williams for Carson Newman. He's kind of a do-everything defender in the back half for them. Second on the team in tackles, 10 tackles for loss, had a kick return for a score. I mean, the kind of guy who ends up just filling up the box. And love to have those kind of guys on the squad as well.
Absolutely. All right. When we come back, we will talk about our first and second teamers. But before we do that, we wanted to recognize those who have supported us and thank them once more. Just wanted to take this opportunity to thank those who have supported D2Football this year. D2Football is free, but it isn't cheap. Your support helps offset our expenses and allows us to expand our coverage. If you like what we're doing, please consider supporting us. Visit D2Football.com/support
Or if you want to do it the old-fashioned way, click contact on the website to find our mailing address. But again, thank you for supporting D2 Football.
And welcome back. Before we get on to the first and second teams, we wanted to recognize Braden J. You'll see him there under the Elite 100 logo. He was on our squad as an all-purpose player for Harding. But as I said, we're going to move on to first and second teams. We've got all of our special teams on there. Eric Scarpino from Gannon, Blake Dowd from Colorado Mines, Dev Holmes from New Haven, Logan Turner from Southwest Baptist, Aaron Wynn from Arkansas Tech, and Devon Jones from Augustana. Before I let you guys talk, I want to speak a little bit about Blake Dowd, because if you go look at the punting statistics, you don't find him anywhere. And that is because he did not average enough attempts per game to qualify for the NCAA stats. Had he had enough per game, and he had as many punts as most of the other guys on the leaderboard, he would have led the nation in punting at almost 46 yards a punt. He punted 43 times and dropped 19 of those inside the opponent's 20. So very impressive, and I think very, very deserving of the top spot as our number one punter.
Yeah, and I just want to quickly highlight Dev Holmes as the, on this list, because he was like number two in terms of punt return yards per attempt. To return 17, almost 18 yards per punt is such a big deal, especially in this age when a lot of punts end up being fair caught. So I just wanted to highlight that for him.
Absolutely. All right, moving on. Let's go back to the offense. We have our first and second team quarterbacks. First team quarterback, Zach Zabrowski from Central Missouri. And on the second team is John Matoka from Colorado Mines.
Yeah, and guys, I mean, we've talked about both of these guys extensively throughout the year. But Zabrowski, topping our list and making the first team, kind of a no-brainer when you just look at the statistical, incredible statistical output that he had on the season, leading the country in passing, yards per game, passing for the season, 61 passing touchdowns against only 5 picks, led the country in total offense. And I think that's one of the things that maybe gets overlooked is how much he did in the rushing game. He only maybe had 7-8 carries a game, but still had over 500 yards rushing on the season. So, obviously the superlatives that we could use for both of these guys are extensive, but Zabrowski just had one of those unbelievable years that you just almost never see. And so that's why he tops our list. Just, kudos to him. Just an incredible season.
Absolutely. All right. Incredible, or at least good set of running backs here. Jay Harris, Northwest Missouri. Jordan Terrell from Barton are our first teamers, and Kendall Givens and Michael from Ouachita Baptist, along with Michael Herzog from Hillsdale, are our second team running backs.
Kendall Givens is a guy that we got a chance to see a few times this year. We were kind of concerned that when Ouachita went from TJ Cole on over to Kendall Givens, that they would have a drop off, and man, he ends up having over 1,200 yards in 11 games and over 20 touchdowns, and just built like a tank, and really helped them not lose a step offensively, and they were still a real strong ball club. So I thought he was worth being recognized.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on to wide receiver. On our first team, we have John Giles from West Florida and Max McLeod from Colorado Mines. On our second team are Dwaylen Ingram from Northern State and Arkell Smith from Central Missouri.
What a standout group of wide receivers. I just want to kind of briefly touch on John Giles, who just absolutely unloaded on the Gulf South this year. And, at one point he was leading the country at wide receiver in receiving yards, sort of tailed off a little bit towards the end, but ended up finishing third in receiving. And I'm pretty sure North Greenville is still remembering him because he just went for 277 yards in that game. So just to show you how explosive he was.
All right. Let's look at our tight ends. We have first team tight end is Devin Garrison from Pittsburgh State. And our second team is Mike Reiserman from Finley.
In today's college football, it's pretty rare for a tight end to lead his team in receptions, but that's what Devin Garrison did for Pitt State. He was their top receiver and quite literally a big target at 6'6", 240. The fact that he's able to be so important in a college offense, I think is really going to mean a lot to the NFL scouts. He's getting some attention. He's got the size and the skill set to project to that next level. He actually has size that's pretty comparable to somebody else that plays in that part of the country, Travis Kelce. So I'm excited to see what he'll be able to do when he gets a shot. But just a tremendous standout senior season for Devin Garrison at Pitt State.
Couldn't agree more, Chuck. All right, moving on to the offensive line, first and second team. On our first team, we have Garrett Carroll from Grand Valley, Marshall Forner from Minnesota State, Trace Jeffries from Pittsburgh State, Michael Jarrell from Finley, and Levi Johnson from Colorado Mines. On the second team, we have Leandre Andreas from Mars Hill, Gabe Clark from Central Missouri, Ty Cobb from Bemidji State, Yuri Haretskavovian from Slippery Rock, and Blake Larson from Augustana. Apologies, Yuri, been practicing all day, still could not land that plane.
Brandon, we knew you wouldn't stick the landing on that. You didn't disappoint us.
Thank you.
Guys, on this list, I want to mention somebody that maybe isn't showing up on quite as many other lists, and that's Marshall Forner from Minnesota State. When we take a look at this, we get a lot of feedback about which guys, from our scout, Josh Buchanan, who is some of the guys getting a lot of looks from the league. And, Marshall Forner's had every NFL team come in and looking at him. And, he's got the size, 6'7", 305 they're looking for. And, it's one of those guys that we thought definitely needs to be on our list. Could see him playing at the next level. And there he is right there.
Yeah, Michael Jarrell, another player who is getting a lot of attention from the NFL and he's a repeat player on this Elite 100 list. He was, I believe, a first or second team player on the same team a year ago. He's just a big body, a long frame, plays with a lot of strength and a lot of power. And something else I think that the NFL scouts are really going to like, guys, he played in 48 games at Finley, started 40 in a row in his career. So he's got a lot of experience. Saw a lot of reps in that Finley offense, just a really dominant force in that offensive line for the Oilers.
All right, moving on to one of my favorite positions, the defensive line. Marquise Fleming from Wingate, Andre Jefferson, Lenore Ryan, Christian McHarrell from Grand Valley, and Nate Wallace from Harding are the first teamers. Lubert Danilis from Benedict, Maven Krejci from Minnesota State, John McMullen from West Florida, and Eddie Miller Garrett from Ohio Dominican are the second teamers.
Brandon, I would say as you and I took a look over this list, this was one of the positions that was really hard to figure out who's first or who's second team. There's so much depth and what we have here in this group. And as we take a look at this, Marquise Fleming's the guy that really stands out to me. 14 sacks in 11 games. Then he had, 23 tackles for loss. I mean, my goodness, 3 forced fumbles on a very good defense. So Marquise Fleming is kind of who I looked at. Brandon, who else did you see on this list?
Well, what I just said, I love the D line, and that's true. But I like, big, long, tall D ends, kind of like Maven Krejci at 6'6", 265. But the one that stood out to me was the guy who I consider to be a little shorter. Well, he is shorter, but it was Nate Wallace from Harding. Anybody who watched the national championship game can look and see what a disruptor that guy is. So he was awesome to watch in person and has been a great player at Harding and deserving of a spot on our first team this year. All right, let's move to linebackers, guys. The first teamers are Micah Kretzinger from Saginaw Valley, Nolan Reeve from Colorado Mines, and Abe Swanson from Grand Valley. On the second team are Garrett Cox from Millersville, Landon Honeycutt from Mars Hill, and Tyler Wary from Kutztown.
You know, Brandon, Saginaw Valley is a school we probably didn't talk about as much as we would have liked to maybe this year because we've had higher expectations for them. And when you look at what Micah Kretzinger did after filling in for Trevor Nowaski, who ended up catching on an NFL roster this year, what he did last year, that the work he did for the Cardinal defense was fantastic. Led the team in tackles with 100. More impressively, he was critical to what they did in pass coverage, latching on to 8 interceptions, 4 of which he returned for touchdowns. So, I mean, Kretzinger, you know, just really stepped into that line of the Nowaskis and the DeGiorgios and those types of guys that we've seen play at Saginaw Valley at that linebacker position over the years.
And we got to see a lot of the Kutztown defense during the championship run and the playoff run that the Golden Bears had. And Tyler Wary was really one of the biggest impact players on that defensive unit. 89 tackles is a big number on a good defensive unit. You know, typically guys that have numbers that push into, you know, getting close to 80 to 90 tackles. Usually those are players that are on a defense that can't get off the field. And that certainly wasn't the case with Kutztown. But honestly, guys, I think it was his leadership that really made him such an impact player. He really was that quarterback on defense for Kutztown and helped take them to, you know, make them one of the most impressive defensive units in the second half of the season.
Right. And finally, we look at our first and second team defensive backs. Willie Drew from Virginia State, Joshua Hayward from Benedict, Sean Stevens from Ferris State, and Tanner Volk from Central Washington. Peyton Buckley from Augustana, Trey Morrison from Wingate, Rico Payton from Pittsburgh State, and Melvin Smith Jr. from Southern Arkansas.
You know, Brandon, let me tell you about a guy on this list who may very well be the highest ranked D2 player in terms of being a pro prospect. And that guy is Willie Drew from Virginia State. He is what was the defensive player of the year in the CIAA. And you know what? He's kind of on a path where, you know, he's going to be playing in the Reese's All-Star game. And Josh Williams a few years ago from Fayetteville State played in that game and now, you know, moves on to the Kansas City Chiefs right from there. So he's that kind of player who's got that kind of trajectory and somebody really to look out for.
Yeah, and Sean Stevens is a player who was on this list a year ago, although a member of a different team. He was at West Liberty last year. Really kind of got the attention of the Ferris State coaches through the transfer portal because of his ball hawking ability. He was one of the top players with interceptions a year ago. Came right back and repeated that again this year. He had 8 interceptions. That was tied for the second most in the nation. Also scored 2 touchdowns. Makes an impact on special teams as well. Just a very explosive player that just seems to make his presence known no matter where he is on the field. GLIAC's Defensive Back of the Year, and also Ferris's nominee for the Cliff Harris Award. So just another great season on a different team for Sean Stevens.
All right. Well, gentlemen, it is that time where we talk about our offensive player of the year, our defensive player of the year, and our coach of the year. Let's go ahead and start with the offensive player of the year. And Chuck, I'll come back to you. I know who you would pick for offensive player of the year, because you talked about it on the show for a large portion of the year. Who are some other players that you would choose other than the guy that you like?
Well, it really was down to 2 guys, of course. It's the same 2 players we talked about for the Harlan Hill Trophy, Zach Zabrowski and John Batoka. But some others that I think really would have deserved some mentions or at least been in the conversation. I actually really liked the seasons that Arkell Smith had from Central Missouri and Max McLeod. They were the biggest receivers in the country. And actually, they were teammates for both of those 2 quarterbacks that we talked so much about. So unfortunately, neither was able to be nominated for the Harlan Hill Award because their quarterbacks were nominated for it. Those 2 guys really stood out to me. Gage Porter, as a quarterback, leading all ball carriers in rushing yards. That's pretty extraordinary. I think if his passing stats had been just a little bit better, he's somebody that I really could have made an argument for. And Jordan Terrell, somebody we didn't talk about tonight, but we've talked about him during the season. Boy, just somebody who's put an entire program on his back. And the way he has delivered for Barton, you know, really for 3 seasons now, just really impressive what he's been able to do. He actually was the top running back if we discount Gage Porter, who led all ball carriers. Jordan Terrell was the top running back out of the traditional running back spot. So just another incredibly impressive performance from him. So those are some other players that I would have considered for this award.
Well, ultimately, Chuck, we did land on your selection, which was Zach Zabrowski from Central Missouri. He is the offensive player of the year. And Chuck, I think, well deserving of that award.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about it a little bit during the national championship pregame show. One of the things that I started doing, heading into that final week was we knew that the Harlan Hill winner was going to be either Zabrowski or John Matoka. We all felt pretty strongly about that. I actually wrote 2 articles, one for each one of them as the winner of that award. And after I wrote those, I just really felt pretty strongly it's got to be Zabrowski. The all divisions records that he set this year, the Division II records that he set this year. It truly was one of the most impressive seasons that any quarterback has ever had in Division II, and that's really saying something.
All right. Well, congratulations to Zach for being named our Offensive Player of the Year. So now we'll talk about our Defensive Player of the Year. And Chris, I'd like to come to you. Who were the guys that you thought were the leading candidates for Defensive Player of the Year for 2023?
Yeah, you could easily look at somebody like Andre Jefferson at Lenore Ryan, and we kind of saw what he was able to do during their run. You've already talked about Nate Wallace and how disruptive he was for Harding. Tanner Volk really stood out for the incredible run that he had, especially with at that safety spot. And Grand Valley had several players that probably could have fell into that bucket. Abe Swanson being one of them, and so those are guys that really stood out for this particular award.
Right. So where did we land for our Defensive Player of the Year? It was Tanner Volk from Central Washington, a guy with amazing stats. Is this where everybody lands with Tanner Volk? Was it a no-brainer?
Well, when you have over 100 tackles, you have 12, 13 picks. I mean, your team makes a run in the playoffs and you're an integral part of it. I mean, wow. Yeah. I mean, if we didn't have, Brandon, such strong candidates on the Offensive Player of the Year side, this could have been a year where Tanner Volk could have gotten even further into that conversation, for being the best player overall in Division II.
Absolutely. So do not disagree there. I don't recall a season similar to the one that he's had, but at my age, recall becomes less and less common. All right, let's go ahead and move and talk about the Coach of the Year. And I'm going to come right back to you. What were your thoughts when choosing Coach of the Year?
I thought there was a lot of guys that were kind of in our conversation. If I take a look, for example, out east, you have Jim Clements at Kutztown, you got Mike Jacobs at LRU. Those guys had seasons that maybe ended up being better than we clearly anticipated. You could also then look at Valdosta and the turnaround they had, and made a run in the playoffs, and then you could really go down to Chris McCullough, down at UTPB, and they came kind of out of nowhere in the minds of most, and had a pretty dangerous squad. Ended up being top 15 or so. Pete Sturbeck over at Mines. I mean, his first year, but I think we probably figured they were going to be pretty darn good. They had that Matoka fellow there and everything else. So after I get done moving through, some of the guys I narrowed in on were probably Josh Lamberson at Central Missouri. We didn't see that year coming, and really strong football team. But I think undeniably, we're probably looking at the winner being from Harding, and that's Paul Simmons and everything that he did with this club and kind of the culture they've created there, and the run that they went on in Super Region 3 is going to be one for the history books.
It is. Not that, you talked about Sturbeck taking over a program that we expected to do well.
Right.
We did expect Harding to do well, but it became obvious, in my opinion, as the season went on, that this Harding team was different. And we talked about that quite a bit during Inside D2 Football, and Paul Simmons deserves the credit he's getting right now.
Totally.
All right. Very good. Well, there you have it. All of our award winners, congratulations. to all of those. Again, it's tough to put this together. It's tough to limit it to 100. And if you're amongst those 100, you're a very special player. And quite frankly, if you're not, you're still probably a very special player, even if you did not make the team. Want to thank some people before we go. Enduring Memories Photography, Tom Morris Photography, the Yakima Herald, Boss's Pizza and Chicken, and as well as our supporters. We want to thank you again, and you, our loyal viewers. We appreciate you being with us all season long on Inside D2 Football, and it's a joy every Sunday to be able to share the D2 college football season with you. We will have an overtime tonight. We will head out of. We will go ahead and run the regular outro, and then take a little break, and then we'll come back and address your questions, criticisms, comments, et cetera, et cetera. But for everybody here, thank you for watching Inside D2 Football, and congratulations to those members of the 2023 D2 Football Elite 100 team.